How do I hone my target market for herbal medicine services, herbal product sales, modular coursework, programs, and any other thing relating to Eastern medicine? Okay, this is a good question. It's important. We have to talk about our target market, right? This is the people we serve. So there are different ways to do this. A lot of times with business coaching and consulting, they have this kind of idea of making an avatar, right? You create your, they call it Arthur Avatar, right? You kind of sit there and you imagine what's your ideal client doing. That's a good exercise. You should do that. You should look at things like demographics, right? Like generally, is it male, female? What's the balance? What's the age range of people you tend to help, right? What kinds of people tend to have these problems? So for example, this is obvious, right? But if you're looking at fertility, then you probably don't want to be targeting women over the age of 65, right? Because that's not the demographic. This is some basic stuff. Beyond that, you want to start to hone this, right? This keyword hone. And by hone, what we mean is we refine it, right? So you have a broad view of who you kind of tend to help and all that. You want to keep track of the difference between the people and the things. And this is a mistake that a lot of practitioners make. A lot of people make this mistake in business in general. I know I used to make this mistake a lot. I probably still do here and there, but I'm very, very aware of it. There's an asymmetry. It's so much better to have a limited amount of things you offer and be able to help a lot of people with that than have a lot of things you offer and then you've diluted your messaging and there's not a lot of people coming around, right? So what tends to happen is we tend to have our intent of who we want to help, what we want to do. We've got something in mind as we start. And if you treat your practice as a paracosm and you use the scientific method and you use iteration and feedback, you're going to find that your mission evolves over time, and that's okay. You should have a loose hand on the reins of this thing, right? Where you can start to let the market tell you what they need. There's always going to be both. There's the practitioner side of we know things that our patients don't know by nature. That's just how it works. But also our market knows things about their problems that we don't necessarily know. So we have to be able to listen. This is why I have market research systems within our program. Fractal systems, attraction, right? Everybody, how do I get new patients, more patients? I'm going online, I need to reach a bigger audience. How do I do that? Well, guess what? The first step before you start talking and making content is market research, which means listening. Yeah, and there's specific ways to do this. I've got systems around this so that you can get a really, really clean sense of what it is people need so that when you do go to speak and open your mouth, it's going to be resonant messaging, right? So that you're not just saying random stuff and hoping something sticks. So we have to first go listening. Now, another way to look at this is with motor and sensory, right? If you want to zoom out, because I'm talking about listening and talking, but in general, the ability to feel, the ability to be sensitive to what's going on, that's a prerequisite for delivering care. So a lot of people in our group are trained acupuncturists. I think that's one of the best things to do with acupuncture is receive acupuncture, right? Learn how that feels, and then also palpate, right? You use your fingers, you use your hands, you use your senses to start to feel the person's body, their environment, their terrain, right? You can start to find acupuncture points by feel. You listen with your hands to the body. You develop your sensory skills, right? And then the motor skills follow that, because then when we go to put a needle in, it's no big deal. It's not trying to muscle and slam something in because we're listening to the terrain, right? This is no different than one of my favorite stories about the woodsman going around to cut down a bunch of trees, and he has a competition, right, with a younger up-and-coming young buck, right, who's muscling through the forest. But the woodsman, part of his deal is he sits down and he looks at the forest, and he looks at which trees need to go. He pays attention first. He's listening first. He's sharpening his axe, right? He's listening to the forest. And then when he goes in, he's doing the forest's work, which makes it easier. He's not fighting nature, right? We do the same thing with our patients. The more we can listen, the more we can come in and do the work that needs doing and not come in imposing our own ideas of what needs to happen. Yeah, and there's going to be a balance between that. So we can't be passive, totally passive, and like, oh, this is one of the things I get on people about holding space, right? Oh, I hold space. And that's important, yes, but that term has also been misused and I think now bastardized because people use it as an excuse to just default to complexity. They just yield to complexity. They can't understand it, so they just say, well, I'm just going to hold space. And it just becomes a very passive role of the practitioner, right? Too passive. I'm just holding space. Whatever you need to do, I'm just a sacred container for your process, right? That's fine, but we also need to know when to be active and when to be assertive, right? Not aggressive, assertive. Yeah. So there's a balance there. because we don't want to be spiritually top heavy, we don't want to be ineffective clinically, and we don't want to just yield and surrender to complexity because we can't understand it. We need to find those things and actually lean into them, push into them, which is the opposite of being totally passive. So there's a difference between sensitivity and feeling, right, and having sensory experience, and just being passive and just letting everything just knock us around all over the place. And we need to understand and be able to walk the line with that, right? So that's the first step, because if you want to hone your target market, just like you want to hone a blade, right? You need to feel, you can't smash through the blade with the sharpening stone and just think that's going to hone the blade, right? You have to listen to the blade, you have to follow the blade, and you have to just refine it. It's the same thing with our messaging, with our market. So while you may start out with a very crude and rudimentary target market, right, to use the business terminology, you go, okay, I help women between the ages of 45 and 75 with fibromyalgia symptoms, and they tend to live in the suburbs of the United States of America, and they're in a certain income bracket, and they tend to shop at these stores, and they like these podcasts and these magazines and all that. That's like basic level avatar, right? It's good. You should do that stuff. We go within our world. We go 4 avatars in. First of all, there's 4 of them we need to be aware of, and then we also go to not just how people kind of look on paper, but also what's their belief system, what are their values, what motivates them, right? So that we can start to really get aligned with the actual humans, not just some characteristics about, if they go to Lululemon for yoga pants or not, right? That's basic. So over time, what's going to happen is you hold the space, right? But in a responsible way, in an assertive way, and you can be responsive to the changing needs of your people. And that helps to start to find these really cool Venn diagrams of sub-niche people. And also within that sub-niche, you've got verticals, right? So you're further refining that based on kind of where people live in the building of the niche. And I've spoken about niche verticals in other places. I'm not going to dive into it here too much. But you want to start to understand innovators, early adopters, right, where they are on the bell curve. You want to understand the kind of readiness to have a solution. And 3% of people maybe are ready to take action right now. There's another 7% that are pretty close, right? You need to start to be able to identify those people, but also what they need specifically. So when we talk about a target market, right, all a market is a group of people who share a common need. Yeah, it's either a problem unresolved or a goal that they haven't yet fulfilled, something like that, right? That's what unites a market when we talk about markets. So when you start to look at your target market, there's this whole thing of like, okay, these are people in pain or people struggling with inflammation or fatigue or whatever it is. Great, you've still got a pretty broad base. If you want to continue to hone that, then we put more and more filters on that. And the way to do that is to start working, right? You get your market research systems, you do attraction, you build your fractal systems so that you can have a practice running that you don't have to really like manhandle all the time. You can get some systems going, you can start to get some results for people. You get feedback that way, and then you'll start to learn, because for me, I'm optimized for deep transformation, long-term working relationships, which means I get time to get to know people and the idiosyncrasies and the nuances and the little specific quirky challenges that they're having. We have time to talk about that stuff over a working relationship, which is how I start to figure out the next level of what I'm going to solve for them. This is how I keep evolving and adapting and innovating my offerings to the market. I'm doing the same thing with Doctors Club, right? When practitioners come in, there's a lot of different reasons people come in. I start to identify these themes and trends, and then it's like, okay, if we can solve these initial problems, then what happens is you get to the next level, and now you have success problems, right? We solve the initial problem, the initial challenge. Now we have to start to figure out, right, how to solve the next level, which is constantly going to be happening. So I'm coming up with new things, new solutions for the people I'm working with, right? I'm not coming up with a bunch of shit out of the ether that's all good ideas, right? But then trying to somehow force it all together and make this like Frankenstein program. And I'm not trying to rope a bunch of people into my mishmash of offerings, right? I'm not trying to run like 90 different offers all over the place. It's consolidated, right? But it's for the people that you're working with. That's where you learn this. You have to learn how to pay attention, and especially to the success problems, because there are things that may surprise you about what people actually need as we get going. So, for example, I started with Modern Vitality with an herbal protocol that's flexible, right? That's not rigid, flexible protocol, Qigong, breath work, these kinds of things. Over time, I started to work with people online, and I started to notice there were different things that they needed. So eventually program updates led to EMFs, right? I wound up doing research on EMF activity, how to mitigate this stuff, like what kinds of products are out there, what kinds of solutions, how to change things in your house. So this basically lumps under the feng shui category. I didn't start out with a feng shui course, right? I didn't start out with my offer going, hey, you've got fibromyalgia, it's time to learn feng shui for EMFs, right? That was a subsidiary branch. Oh, it's getting windy. That was a subsidiary branch that was based on the needs of the people I'm working with. So you follow them, right? You follow them. They will show you what to learn next. They will help you decide what to build next. They'll help you allocate your attention and your resources to building something that's useful. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to spin our wheels. I know when you're young, this doesn't seem like anything. It's like you got all the time in the world, right? You're young in practice. You go, I'll just learn everything. I'll just research stuff. It's okay if nothing comes of it, right? There is some truth to that, of building up a broad knowledge base and just kind of creating things just for the sake of creation. But as time goes on, like for me, as I got a family, kids, right, all these things, I want to have a life for myself, not just like work all the time. We have to be smart about where we allocate our energy and our mental resources, because there's only so much of it in the day, right? So that means one of our guiding principles, guiding heuristics, is utility. Is this useful for the people I'm helping? Right? And the way to do that is not to sit in your pajamas daydreaming about what people might need, but it's to create systems where they can start to tell you and you can start to listen, right? And when you start to notice enough of this happening, a general theme going on with your group, for example, it's a no-brainer to start pointing your attention at the next level of research. So for example, for Doctors Club, I've noticed over the past 2-3 years that the practitioners I've been working with really like the idea of clinical clarity, right? It's something that's out of reach for most practitioners, something they've never even fucking considered for the most part, of having like a very streamlined way of thinking about their process, which, you know, it's nobody's fault. It's just like, if you haven't been exposed to this stuff, it's very hard to kind of come up with it out of the ether, right? But to have an organized, structured way, to have a process that takes all your cool clinical pearls and everything you like, all the fun stuff you learn in seminars and all this stuff, and then thread those pearls into a navigable algorithm, which lets the people who come into your world all have the same fair opportunity to go through what's in your mind, right? As opposed to when a patient comes, it's like whatever's top of mind, some knee-jerk response, a heuristic, that's what you do, right? Oh, you've got a headache. Well, here's an herb for headache, right? Part of our strength with holistic medicine and being able to think in whole systems is being able to understand interlinked, multimodal, multi-cause, multi-effect, like networked and webbed realities. And to be able to take somebody through that in a comprehensive way, it's going to require you create an algorithm of how you're thinking, right? So this is something I've noticed that practitioners, they really like this idea. They're very responsive. So now I'm leaning into this. I'm going, okay, how can I build this on your behalf, right? So that's been occupying me for the last, 9 or 10 months of trying to create solutions for this that you can plug yourself into, right? So that's one example of me starting out with a stake in the ground and going, hey, we need to focus on clinical clarity. It's important. And then by paying attention to the practitioners, I'm listening to my market, right? The people I serve, my members, and I'm going, okay, I can take this up a notch. We can do success problems of like, you've got your own algorithm, but you need something more fleshed out and building it, right? So that's how you do it. You constantly dance between what you think people need, how they're responding, where they go when they get success, and you're iterating always. So if there's also something that you do that doesn't work, now you have to troubleshoot that and go, okay, what's the blind spot there? What's the gap there? Right? And then you build more and more systems. You continually layer these systems so that you have something that's not like bulky and weird. It's actually still going to be very lean and very responsive, but it's comprehensive, right? It's comprehensive. So initially, it's okay to start with a broad niche. It's totally okay. And a lot of practitioners actually aren't specialized at all. They're kind of like, they just show up, and part of the appeal is that they just have a certain presence, a certain personality, right? And that's totally fine. If you can attract people that way, that's a viable way to do it, right? You don't have to always specialize and like niche down. But I would offer that even in those cases where a practitioner's specialty is kind of just the way they show up, right? And they see like geriatrics, pediatrics, cancer patients, like anxiety, they see a whole variety of conditions. They're not specialized by condition, right? They're specialized by vibration, basically. There's a certain vibe they have, and people with different conditions, it doesn't matter the condition. It's somebody who's going to resonate with their values and their presence. And that's how they connect with a specific niche, right? So there's different ways to specialize. I've done other videos on the myth of specialization. There's lots of ways to specialize, and it's not just by disease. So even in those cases, it's okay to start broad and as long as you start to build the right kinds of recursive market research systems in play, which I teach you how to do. Sometimes it's a matter of creating a form the right way, having the right kinds of questions worded correctly to start to open up people's minds in the right order, right? So that you can really tap into their train of thought. Ways of analyzing that, starting to sense patterns and trends, and then being able to speak to the universal and the unique at once, right? These are skills you develop. But basically, all those things will start to feed back. And so over the length of your career, you can actually start to kind of refine and weave around with these different niches and sub-niches of patient populations. And then what you're going to be making is always relevant, always useful by nature, because that's the fractal lens that everything's been filtered through, right? I don't want to waste my time with useless stuff. Even this video, for example, came from a question, right? So I know that this video is going to be answering somebody and everybody else who has the same question. I'm not wasting my time just blah, 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 right? I'm making something with utility. I hope that helps. Get to work.